I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. For any of us at any age, what if we could look forward to being hot, happy, and thriving from age 40 and beyond? It sounds pretty great, doesn't it? Well, it's a reality via the work of our guest, who we are so fortunate to have with us today, Dr. Mariza Snyder. Dr. Mariza, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Mariza is a luminary and an author of many books. She is a lecturer and a content expert at conferences. She's on many high-profile platforms in the media that you would be familiar with, Fox, Oprah, Dr. Oz, etc. And she's going to talk to us today about a bunch of really powerful and cool facets of metabolism and blood sugar and breakfast. So today is going to be a blast, and I thank our audience for joining us. As we prepared for today's session, it sounds like it'll be helpful just to get to hear from you. What was the defining moment that led you to care about your work, Dr. Mariza?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the luxury, I guess you can say, of some multiple defining moments. Probably the first big defining moment for me, I grew up with chronic migraines, and that really rocked my world. I missed out on so many events, on school, on spending time with friends, slumber parties, all of that. And I remember coming out of college, heading into med school, wanting to help girls and women. Particularly, I just saw a lot of girls my age dealing with migraines in high school, just not wanting to have to suffer the way that I did. And that kind of luckily led me into women's hormone health, where I've had my fair share of all kinds of hormone issues, including chronic fatigue issues and low thyroid function. But I remember, a defining moment where I was really struggling, just to even get up in the morning to get ready for work, to see patients, and knowing that it was my hormones. And I remember seeing a friend of mine or a colleague that was a hormone practitioner, and the solutions that we had even back in in 2010 weren't really addressing a lot of what women were going through, including myself. And so I remember there was just that defining moment for me where I was being offered, anti-anxiety medications, SSRIs, and birth control to manage my symptoms that we just got to do better. And this is still often the standard of care for so many women, particularly where I'm at in my journey, which is perimenopause. I think about the uptick in birth control and SSRIs that are being recommended to women during this really profound and critical transition. And I know that we can do better than that. And so that's what I've been doing for the past, I want to say 13 years. It's every day I live, breathe, and think about how I can serve women.
Wonderful. Thank you for what you do. I buried the lead, by the way. The part I didn't mention in your bio is your podcast is energized, correct?
Yes.
And millions of downloads. So that's so cool and such a testament to really powerful service. So it's nice to know that people will be able to check that out and benefit. So let's talk about hormone imbalances that drive weight and cravings.
So the big one that we just got to put on the mark, and I think the reason why this one isn't kind of, as flagged as easily, is one, we don't even test for it. We don't test for insulin. We don't test for fasting insulin. And often it's not on the radar until someone's got, a fasting blood sugar of close to 100 milligrams per deciliter, which would be considered in the healthcare system, the qualifier for prediabetes. And so what I would love for women to be looking at, and for people in general to be looking at an earlier age, is a fasting insulin level and seeing where they're at. What we know for sure is that insulin resistance drives, fat storage. It drives, issues like prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, but most importantly, it is driving metabolic dysfunction. And so that is often the hormone that I really want to have on people's radar. And especially as if we're talking about women in particular, as we move through kind of that critical transition of perimenopause, and we have declining and fluctuating hormones, which is really kind of the hallmark of perimenopause, that 4 to 10 years prior to menopause, which is just one day after you haven't had a period for 12 months. When we have those fluctuations and ultimate decline, because those hormones are so erratic and declining at the same time, we see a greater uptick of insulin resistance. And so by the time most women are, I would say 88% of women, by the time they're 45 years old, will have at least one biomarker of metabolic dysfunction. And I can share a little bit about those, but a big driver of those biomarkers going out of range is due to insulin resistance and blood sugar or blood glucose variability. And so that's really the area that I always want to focus on when it comes to taking care of anyone, is like, what are your lipid levels? What are your blood glucose levels? What's your fasting insulin and your hemoglobin A1C? So we can see like what is the expenditure of the way that your cells manage energy. And if they're not managing it right, at some point we're going to tip the scale. Mitochondrial efficiency, which is the little powerhouses that make all the energy, that allow us to have this conversation, that allow people to do the things that they do every single day, get up, read, go to work. When they drop efficiency below 50%, that's when we start to see those biomarkers begin to shift and change. And so my big focus for so many people is, we've got to really be looking at those particular metabolic numbers, especially during a time where, due to other hormones, those metabolic numbers will begin to shift and change, and not in a favorable direction.
Mm. This is so great getting to talk about insulin resistance with you. I find that it's one, the people I take care of in the clinic, the idea that takes them a little longer, I think, to get their arms around it.
Yeah.
And I've conjectured maybe it's because it's a silent phenomenon. We can't feel, most of us, we can't feel it, that our blood sugar's 86 versus 100. And I certainly have never met a person who can tell their insulin's 4.2 in the morning versus 18. As we segue into drilling down into this a little more, I should mention that in conventional medicine, it's acceptable to have a fasting insulin up around 20. And
yeah.
The cutoff we've used in my clinic, and I don't know, I'll be interested to hear what your cutoff is, but we reassure people that if their fasting insulin is less than 4.5, that's doing pretty well. So the thing I talk with folks about is this lock and key idea, that the glucose, the sugars in the blood, and that insulin lock and key, the key needs to go into the lock in each cell and open the door and let the sugar in. And then so many folks are motivated because they do want to be lean and not struggle with food cravings. They're really, really motivated when they learn that insulin's a fat storage hormone. So before we segue into breakfast, would you share some more about insulin and blood sugar dynamics? Because I think people are going to be super interested in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm so glad you're measuring it. I measure it all of the time. And so ideally, I'm looking for a fasting insulin of 5 and under. But I would love to see it in the 4s or the 3s.
Well, they're both very low. I mean, we're talking real success. I'm intrigued that they're quite close to one another by just 0.5. So
and if people aren't able to get a fasting insulin, which obviously we can go out of network and order those tests, which I highly recommend people do, is that most doctors will run a typical lipid profile. And so I'm also telling people, divide your triglycerides over your HDLs. And I'd love to see that number as close to 1 or under 1 as possible. And so if you're kind of heading to 2 or more, then that is a sign of insulin resistance as well. And so, yeah, the question is, I know that insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity and insulin receptibility is a very complex subject. Obviously, we know that, holding on to abdominal visceral fat is inflammatory, that can drive kind of the insulin cascade. But one of the areas that I feel like we have a lot of control over is managing our blood glucose. Because again, if we have too much, as you said, that lock and key situation where there's too much glucose flooding into the cell, and you can imagine it as like a kind of the train conductor shoveling coal to run the train, and he just has too much coal coming in, too many substrates all the time due to all of this blood glucose coming into the cell. Ultimately the response of that is that insulin has to keep on being released so that we can force the cell to take that in. Well, at some point the cell's going to send that signal that they just can't handle it anymore, and you're going to have that hyperinsulinemia where you've got more insulin in the blood because it is trying to just bang on the door and shove more coal into that train as possible. And so, lifestyle strategies can really be helpful. And one of the ways, since it's hard, you're not measuring fasting insulin all of the time, one of the best ways to really look at this is measuring your glucose throughout the day. And one of my favorite ways to do that, even if it's just for 1 month or maybe it's for a quarter, for 90 days, you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor where you really get a sense, like you said, can a person tell when they're fasting glucose is 75 versus 96? There signs and symptoms of, glucose variability, or, kind of that crash and burn scenario where your blood sugar goes up, insulin has to respond, and then you see that drop in blood sugar below, kind of below that normal mean or that optimal level, and that kickstarts cravings, and you kind of just find yourself on this vicious cycle, this blood sugar roller coaster that I think a lot of people are on and just have absolutely no idea that they're just living this way. I would say that a good chunk of my 20s, because I was, I it's really fascinating to me, kind of, the lots of ways that we become, addicted to sugar, or we get on that blood sugar roller coaster. And, for me, when I was growing up, my migraines really started due to some traumatic things that happened to me as a child. And I found myself, even in high school and college, really chasing energy, and not in a sustainable way. And so, I found myself kind of having these crashes. And what I didn't realize, what I thought was high cortisol or cortisol deregulation, survival mode, was probably a combination of, deregulated cortisol and some level of blood sugar variability, like just crazy variability, and, early signs of insulin resistance or some level of insulin resistance. And so I struggled with a lot of energy issues, thinking that it was a cortisol and, an adrenaline issue. More so, I realized that I had kind of combined that with a blood sugar problem too. And so I think that happens to a lot of us, especially a lot of the moms and the women that I'm working with who are just racing from one thing to the next, and they don't even realize that their blood sugar is just so variable throughout the day. And I've put CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, where we're measuring the interstitial fluid for a person 24/7. And there's so many massive aha moments when we're wearing these continuous glucose monitors about how our sleep impacts our blood sugar, what we eat in the morning impacts our blood sugar. Basically, all the things that we're doing all day really have a profound impact. And it's particularly, around food that I see the biggest shifts and changes, but even lifestyle has a profound impact. And so I think when we start to understand the way that our bodies respond to our environment and to the foods that we're consuming, we can really start to tailor and kind of optimize that blood glucose. And that can have a very profound impact on reducing any level of insulin resistance that we're dealing with.
Super, right. With the consequence being ease, having the body sort of drift toward lean rather than us feeling like we need to force it. And the energy that you described. I also notice people who, their skin gets less puffy and gets flat, and their eyes get bright when they flatten their insulin. and blood sugar. What you're saying is so important. As we segue into breakfast and jumpstarting metabolism, I want to encourage people to follow through on what Dr. Mariza is saying in a couple of ways. Know that there are ways for people to get continuous glucose monitors. I use the functional medicine criteria in my clinic for hyperglycemia. So anybody with a fasting blood sugar of greater than 90, anyone with a fasting insulin greater than 4.5, and anyone with a hemoglobin A1C, what their blood sugars have been doing for 10 weeks of 5.6% or higher, I just offer them a continuous blood glucose meter prescription through their insurance or what have you. But folks can invest in these on their own. And I couldn't agree more. The payoff is off the chart. The thing that I love the most is then the person, along with their Oura Ring and their Apple Watch, et cetera, they're becoming part of the personal health information revolution. And they're seeing that stress and sleep. I can't actually think of a greater embodiment of real-time demonstration of concept than a continuous glucose meter, that it's all of the dimensions of lifestyle that are reflected in our blood sugar, not just what passes our lips.
Is so true. And I think that's why it's so profound. And yes, when we have somebody who's wearing either a Whoop strap, or obviously Whoop doesn't connect with the CGMs, but I know Apple Watches do. And then with the Oura Ring, I mean, you really do have a complete assessment of what's going on. Cause, the question, even with sleep, was what I had at night impacting my sleep? Or is my sleep impacting, and is that having a profound impact on my fasting blood sugar in the morning? Or was it really the disrupted sleep that I was having? And so you get to really parcel that out and figure out, no, I actually stopped eating at 6 p.m. I drank tea after that. So if I had a fasting blood sugar, like if I see a fasting blood sugar for me above 80, I'm investigating. So then I'm looking at my Oura Ring, I'm looking at, the Whoop strap, I'm just looking at what may have happened that night that could have driven that. If, for us, we finish eating at 6 p.m. in my home. I have a toddler, a little 3-year-old, and he eats on the early side, and we all just eat on the early side, and we eat together. And we're really mindful of, and we'll talk about metabolically healing foods in a moment. And then we're done. We're drinking water. My husband and I are drinking tea, and we're doing the wind down with him. And so, one of the things I track to kind of see how my sleep went outside of wearing, obviously, the Oura Ring or a Whoop strap, is looking at my fasting blood sugar the next day as well. And so, yeah, you really get to start to look at all of these component pieces. And the most exciting thing I find is that you get to make real-time changes, and that have a profound impact on your overall health span. Not only feeling good in the moment, but also we're talking about many years to come.
Gives people so much agency and empowerment in an age where they feel adrift amidst the chaos and the overwhelm. As we segue into breakfast, 2 things to share during this transition. So one is that it was really fun getting to talk to this business leader in functional medicine named Tom Blue, and he shared kind of a pre-diabetic picture that he'd been struggling with. And at some point in his health journey, he'd been told that bananas were the culprit in his blood sugar, and he loved them and gave them up. And when he got his continuous glucose meter, it turned out the most hyperglycemic event of the day was getting on the subway, and bananas didn't budge his sugar at all. And so he got his beloved bananas back and put his AirPods in and started listening to peaceful music before he got on the train, and dropped his blood sugar in real time. So as we go into
it's so good.
Well, I just love it. What you and I get to hear, we get to hear the stories, and people say, oh, I learned this and I learned that, and I didn't see such and such coming, or I was shocked, or my heart rate variability got better. My mom got hospitalized, but then when I got back on the treadmill, my heart rate variability got better and I could deal with the stress. It's just so many dimensions of personal empowerment. It's shocking. So I love what you said a moment ago. I'm going to illuminate breakfast for us, the importance of breakfast. And then you've got an early cutoff in your household compared to sort of the standard American diet, acronym SAD, late meal, snacking into the evening. And a lot of people don't have breakfast. And for those of my patients that do time restricted eating or cyclic fasting, whatever term we want to use, I always advise them that the sort of default protocol that's the most defensible and safest is eating breakfast and shutting off eating
early
at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And we know for sure that folks who skip breakfast, there are a group of folks trying to prevent dementia, or they've got the ApoE4 gene, another discussion. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's folks that need keto where some of them, for specific reasons, have to look at that. But even the degree to which skipping breakfast undercuts the cortisol awakening response, just the orchestrational start of the day, our metabolic manager coming out and saying, chop, chop, everybody, here's the tasks. Let's get to hear from Dr. Mariza about breakfast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you that, ending ideally having breakfast, I'm especially for the women that I take care of, I'm very concerned about the loss of lean muscle mass. And, the opportunity for muscle protein synthesis really is in the morning. And if there was a time where we were in a thermogenic state, it's going to be then. You're going to have that opportunity to burn it off and set yourself really up for success. So skipping breakfast, I'm really hoping that we're going to move towards breakfast again, but just being very smart about I would say every meal we want to be mindful about what we're putting into our body that is going to be nourishing our cells and it's going to be supporting our mitochondrial function. I mean, I think that is really the name of the game. But I want women to feel, I want all of us to feel resilient and to feel strong and to feel like we can pick up grandchildren or great grandkids wherever you're at. I have one of my best friends, her mom is the same age as my mom, and my mom's gearing up for a half marathon next weekend, and she ran the Dublin marathon. And mind you, I would love for my mom to be strength training more than she is running, but that woman she is strong. She has got resilience. She can 100% pick my son up and throw him in the air, and it is not a problem. And whereas I have a best friend of mine whose mom is a year younger than mine, she has a son who's 2. I think he weighs as much as mine does. Mine's a little lean, mean muscle machine. And so he probably weighs about the same, but her mom cannot pick him up without just being in so much pain at the age of 62. And so, I think about what my wish and my desire for every person is to, those last 10 years, although women live longer, 25% of our life is often riddled with chronic conditions. And so my wish for and desire is that women and all of us have that resilience and that health span and that strength to really do the things we want to do, that we were saving up to do, with ease and grace and that ability to do so. And so one of the things I focus on when it comes to breakfast is, one, do the 12 hours, give yourself that break. So for me, if we stop eating at 6, obviously we come up on that 12 hours at 6 a.m. We're getting up around 7, and that's when we're breaking our fast. And so a big part of that metabolic meal is one, starting it with electrolytes and clean water. So that's one way that we get started, just kind of really set the system and replenish all of the electrolytes and all that we've lost at night. And then it is focusing on protein. So protein, fiber, and healthy fats. And so for us, that is, it is, salmon from the night before, it's cauliflower rice. It's dinner, it's leftovers. It's not breakfast. Sometimes we'll make omelets with turkey sausage and with spinach or broccoli and cauliflower. Or I'll make a green smoothie with protein in it along with something else. And so we're just really mindful that we are hitting protein numbers. We are getting that fiber. I mean, I sprinkled chia seeds on everything in our household, and that we are getting healthy fats, plant-based healthy fats. And so that's really kind of how we structure our meals, especially breakfast when we're kicking off the first meal of the day. We obviously do not put sugar in anything. So swapping any type of sugar substitutes for things like cinnamon. So I put cinnamon in my coffee. And then if you're looking at a CGM, seeing if you're a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, whether, black tea drinker, if caffeine has an impact on your blood glucose rise in the morning, before a meal or with that meal. And so be looking at all of these types of things, but again, prioritizing protein so that we're kind of really stimulating, especially for women, muscle protein synthesis, making sure that you're getting that fiber intake. I aim for a minimum of 35 grams, ideally getting closer to 50. I know it's not easy, but you got to start it in the morning. And then healthy fats to really help kind of assimilate and break down those important vitamins and minerals. And so that would be what I would really be aiming for when it comes to a metabolically supportive and healthy breakfast.
Mm, you're making me hungry. And I had a good breakfast. So there's testament right there to the power of your concept. But gosh, I just had a correspondence from a person the other day I've taken care of for 8 years who had just gone to healthy whole food. And I find it's the beauty that's hiding right in front of us. It might be the thing we encourage the most often that folks are the latest to the party for, is just running the whole food experiment. Some folks jump in and love it right away. They're all set to up their game. But I find some others kind of wait to really dive in and try that. And I encourage them to do what Dr. Mariza is saying, because there's a natural high. There's a metabolic high that goes with eating this way that just sets the stage for the whole day.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's a very confusing landscape right now, all the nutrition recommendations. And I'm always thinking about, like, how do we fuel our mitochondria? How do we fuel our cellular energy? And a lot of that has to do with supporting our gut and liver. And so again, I do want those really, getting enough protein so that we're actually maintaining and building some lean muscle. And obviously you need to lift heavy weights. Like we need to, really, get those muscles working for us. But I also I want to make sure there's plants in there. I want the fiber, I want the healthy fats, I want the omegas, I want the micro and antioxidant nutrients that are really going to help support us on a cellular level. And so that's kind of where I land in my spectrum of eating metabolically healthy meals or nutrient dense foods. Is and I don't feel like it needs to be very extreme, but I also feel like watching and managing blood sugar variability, kind of keeping yourself in that range, which for me, I would love to see someone ideally in an optimal range of kind of the lower end of 70 milligrams per deciliter, and the higher end is 110 milligrams per deciliter. So that's 2 hours after that meal. So postprandial. So that's I mean, I know that's an optimal range for people, but I absolutely believe that we can get there. And so that is really the intention for how I nourish my family, is how do we make sure that we stay within that range where our blood glucose is as flattened as possible, pretty steady throughout the day. And we are feeding our cells what they need to fully function so that we feel alive and, have as much vitality as possible, not only moving through the day, but moving through our years.
I think that's really, really beautiful and powerful. And that's the sort of approach I see help folks the most. I want to note that what you're describing is very akin to what I see as the process of how the Institute for Functional Medicine comes out with recommendations. None of us sees it, but thought leaders like you get into a room and they hash it out, and then they put out consensus recommendations. And the things that pass muster are the things that you're describing. And what you're describing is the antidote to food confusion. And so it's hugely helpful when people can go to a trustworthy source and hit their groove. And once they find thought leaders they trust like you, they can just get moving and quit worrying. And I think that's another sort of unfortunate contributor to people's health issues now is, now we've got a diagnostic code for food fear, and gosh, it's a bit of a mess. And as we hear about any other thoughts you have today about jumpstarting metabolism, a fascinating concept I learned about via this author who's kind of a hero of mine, David Duncan. I was reading his third novel the other day, and he describes this thing called apophatic learning, and it's learning by taking away. And a lot of the time what happens for us is we think more and more and more, and it can be so refreshing and clarifying and such a relief, such a unburdening to say, oh, here's a thought leader I trust. Now I can do less. Now I can focus in on where the payoffs are. I can simplify, I can trust, I can lean in, I can stock my pantry, and I can get on with taking my kid to daycare and calling my friend. And so another, I think, powerful motif of finding good thought leaders is just that then you free up bandwidth for other things.
Yeah, I mean I think the things that really matter, hopefully, you know.
Yeah.
I mean that
Yeah.
you know, when I tune in, obviously health is the epicenter of it all. You know, if there's any
Mhm.
lesson I've learned over the years is that, you know, with health, we really can show up. We can play full out with our family. We can play full out with our purpose. We can play full out in the things that we love. When we're struggling with health, you know, like so many of us are at some level dealing with chronic conditions, it really becomes the focus, and it can be very hard to really give and show up fully present in the things that matter the most. You know, when I tune in, and you know, and what I desire is, you know, time spent, adventure and time spent with the people that I love, like getting to do the things that I love with the people that I love, like that to me is everything. And so, you know, how do we create and, you know, and get, you know, have that clarity and that safety in that we are taking care of ourselves and that we feel good, and so that we can really show up in the areas that matter the most. So yeah, I agree with you. Like once you feel really secure that you've got a plan, or that you feel confident in the person who's guiding that journey, you can just follow that, feel confident in that, and then focus on the things that matter. Agreed.
Hmm. Yeah, our wealth being our health, and the richness of showing up for others. So, any other thoughts on jumpstarting metabolism you haven't shared that you'd like to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of them. I one of the one of the things I love, you know, and I talk about movement. I think movement is life. You know, that was a lesson I learned a long time ago as well. And I mean, the movement that just makes the most sense. I saw a quote the other day, which is very few things aren't resolved with a walk. And I just felt that felt so true to me, you know. And, you know, back in the day, we used to live in the Bay Area, and we would be a 10-minute drive from the redwoods, and we had this like from door to door, we could do this 45-minute hike in the redwoods. We would drop into this beautiful like fern area. I swear there were fairies down
Mm.
there. It was so
Hmm.
magical.
Hmm.
And you know, we would do that walk many times a week because it was just so easy to do. And I remember my best ideas and creativity, just something, and just the reduction of stress, just really put my heart and my mind at ease. And so, walking is probably one of the most profound longevity hacks that I can think of, and it's so easy. And there's so many side benefits on top of, if you're out in nature, especially in the morning, you're helping to reset your circadian rhythms. If you are doing it after meals, you are helping to balance out your blood sugar. If you're walking with family, there's that deep connection with them. So there's just so many benefits. So walking, you know, the booster there is walking after meals. My family and I, one of the reasons why we eat early as well, yeah, we walk after, I walk after lunch. My son is obviously running and walking right now at school all day. He's outside at school. So, and that was really important to us, because I was like, how do we build resilient? How do I build a resilient child? And I was like, and how do we get that deep connection to nature? I mean, he's jumping in puddles right now, you know, in the rain. Um, and then we walk after dinner. So, you know, we are, as a family, we do it. It's great at aiding our digestion. It's a beautiful way of connecting, and it's just a great way to just kind of, you know, whatever's going on in your life, whatever feels heavy, you know, whatever's you're kind of, anytime I'm feeling stuck, you know, a 5-minute walk just outside. We live right at the ocean's right there. So we're I'm a 8-minute walk away from two different beaches, two different surfing beaches. And so every day I'm heading to one beach or the other. So that would be one of my biggest longevity hacks, because I think it just checks so many boxes. And it really is easy for so many of us to do. Another longevity hack that I absolutely love, as I mentioned earlier, is picking up those weights. So that is the area I focus on. I lift weights, and then I take a lot of copious walks throughout the day. Those are absolute favorites. And then another one that I absolutely love that I don't think we do enough of, that is missed on us, is spending time with our friends and the people that we love in real time, really committing to spending time. When we talk about deregulated cortisol, which I think so many of us are struggling with and dealing with, oxytocin is really the antidote to that. And so really making sure that you're prioritizing time with the people that you love. One of my favorite books that came out this last year is the co-founders of Mind Body Green, which is called The Joy of Well-Being. And the book so resonated with me because the joy, the relishing of well-being, I think, has been so lost in all the protocols and all the fear, and just getting lost in all of it. And I just getting back to the joy of feeling healthy, of being healthy, that just so resonated with me. A lot of what we talked about today, blood sugar regulation, obviously making sure that our metabolic health is good to go. It's such a big part of our aliveness and the life force that is, pulsing through us. But then, spending time with the people that we love, making dinner with the people that we love, having dinner at the table, walking with our family and friends. These were the things that really were the spark that created the joy of well-being. And so those are the things that we really double down, which are really non-negotiables for me and my family in this household, is how do we relish in the joy of well-being. And that's really kind of the epicenter of the work that I hope to infuse into what I'm educating on, into conversations that I'm having. Because at the end of the day, if we don't love how we feel when we're doing a lot of these habits and protocols, I don't think it's going to get us where we want to go.
So powerful. That just totally lights me up, and I know it's going to light up the folks that listen to this podcast. And it illuminates two things that folks might want to reflect on. One is that when we do these things as play and joy and engagement and awe at the blessing of life, the blessing of connection, we're in parasympathetic mode. We're in rest and digest, rest and restore mode. The prefrontal of our cortex of our brain is in executive control rather than our midbrain. There's all these miraculous things happening. And for anybody that feels oppressed by the challenges of the world, what could be more helpful than showing up for others out of radiant vitality and connection as a sense of light in the darkness? That our birthright is connection and supporting one another and being healthy and vital and having awe in the moment. I just think that helps other folks now more than ever to show up in that particular way. And I'm just so glad that our audience gets to benefit from your wisdom.
Oh, thank you.
Couple things. Where can people find you? Where can they find your podcast? And are there any particular offerings that would be worth noting that they should keep an eye out for?
As well, you mentioned it, and thank you so much. The podcast is called Energized with Dr. Mariza, and it's really particularly focusing on women in midlife and how do we age powerfully. That's really the intention of the show. I always say that I serve everybody by serving women.
Oh, beautiful. It's a measure of our integrity as a society, the reverence with which we hold women.
And I have, I know we didn't go, and we talked a little bit about fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, and fasting blood sugar. But I do have a metabolic assessment if anyone wants to really dive in. And these are functional. I offer functional ranges that we talked about today as well. Obviously the ranges that you're going to go into your healthcare practitioner is going to be a slightly different ranges than what we really want on a functional level. So for instance, you and I talked about anytime we see a fasting blood sugar above at 90 milligrams per deciliter or higher, we really want to be looking deeper at our metabolic health and potentially putting on the CGM. What you're going to see in that your doctor's office is going to be, they're looking, the flag is 100 milligrams per deciliter. And what's fascinating as well, just, it's important to have these numbers and to know these numbers yourself, because you may go into your doctor's office and you may even be at 100 milligrams per deciliter, which is really the criteria for pre-diabetes. And there's a good chance that one, they won't say anything. And two, they will not create a protocol to manage it as well. It's just not really on their radar. And so just speaking, having an assessment guide where you can really know your numbers, and then, having, listening to shows like this or having resource that you can dive into to really start to create a plan that works for you. And so that's what I really wanted to speak into is, having something that you have functional references for, where you can flag yourself. I know, I wish we were at a time where we definitely had the healthcare system really working on improving our metabolic health, but we're just not there yet. And so, but luckily, we can become the CEO of our own health and take matters into our own hands if we start to see those numbers creeping out of optimal range.
Absolutely. And your website is it drmariza.com?
Yes.
Right.
And I'm forgetting the link for this particular, but I will have it for you.
And we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well, have a wonderful day, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.